My name is Marcelo Suarez Orozco, and I have the great honor and unique responsibility to serve as Chancellor of Boston's Public Research University. Thank you. Greetings, beacons, and greetings, friends. Thank you for joining us tonight, in person and virtually. There are approximately 120 of us following the presentations this evening remotely. So happy that we were able to set that up to address, to have a conversation on a very, very fundamental topic of our times, climate adaptation here in our city, Boston, our harbor city, and beyond. Before we begin the program, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Massachusetts Boston's work takes place in and around Boston Harbor, which is a traditional ancestral territory of the Massachusetts tribe. The Massachusetts people have an unbreakable relationship with this place, and they continue to care for these lands and waters as their ancestors did for thousands of years. We are grateful, we are humble, and this history makes tonight's conversation all the more prescient. With the emergence of behaviorally modern humans, some 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens sapiens has, over time, become what we are now, a geologic force, creating new and dangerous phase of Earth's history, termed by Paul Crutzen, Nobel laureate in chemistry, the Anthropocene. While scholars debate its timing, the Anthropocene refers to the immense effects, geologic really, of human activity on all aspects of Earth's physical systems and all living systems on the planet. With unchecked climate change, we put ourselves at risk of massive crop failures, new and re-emerging infectious diseases, heat extremes, droughts, megastorms, floods, and ominously for our harbor city, sharply rising sea levels. The economic activities that contribute to global warming are wreaking other profound damages, including air and water pollution, deforestation, land degradation, causing a rate of species extinction unprecedented for the past 65 million years. And it's a dire threat to human health through increases in heart disease, stroke, pulmonary disease, mental health, infections, and cancer. Climate change threatens to exacerbate the current unprecedented flow of forcibly displaced migrants and add to human misery by stoking violence and conflict. The poorest of the planet, who still rely essentially on 19th century technologies to meet basic needs, such as cooking and heating, are bearing the brunt of the damages caused by the economic activities of the rich. Africa is Exhibit A. Quote, we read in the New York Times this morning, or maybe it was yesterday's morning, COVID invades the cerebellum and our sense of time is totally altered. Quote, while African nations contribute less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, the recent report by the World Meteorological Organization and other agencies underscore the outsized impact that changes in climate are having on the continent's 1.3 billion people as floods grow worse, droughts last longer, and temperatures continue to rise. As the majestic snows of Kilimanjaro, Masai Natje Nigai, pardon my Masai, which is non-existent, but that translates into the house of God, so evocatively described by Ernest Hemingway, are vanishing. Simply stated, climate change and its effects are the most significant existential threat to our planet, to the human family, and to the biosphere. We are facing the uber wicked problem affecting every aspect of life on the planet. Climate change is altering all living systems, obviously how we live, and is necessitating noble approaches to adaptation. The rapid warming of our planet is a global challenge that requires a global response. It is also a local challenge that will require unique solutions that are adaptable for every community in different ways. The scale of the problem and the interconnectedness of the issues, economic, social, political, racial, can make our responses feel insufficient. Tonight, we're focusing on climate adaptation in Boston for several reasons. First, it is undeniable that the climate is changing and we must prepare and we must adapt. Inaction, a form of action, is not a choice we can afford. Second, how we adapt is a matter of equity and inclusion and opportunity to root out the racist systems that once again threaten to divide our societies, our environments between the haves and the have-nots, the powerful and the powerless. Additional, the matter of massive global migration, a topic of which I have made my life as a scholar the subject of my inquiry, is dramatically exacerbated by climate disruption, and it is, of course, at our doorstep. We are seeing at our southern border families and children arriving in unprecedented numbers. U.S. authorities detain more than 1.7 million migrants along the southern border with Mexico during the year 2021 that ended September. And arrests at the border by the Border Patrol have soared to the highest levels ever recorded. We are seeing large numbers of new arrivals from equatorial regions such as Haiti, Central America, Venezuela, but also West Africa and other regions of the world. They are at our doorstep. Changing climate is a stress multiplier in already tense regions of the world, and therefore is a major contributing factor to the mass migrations of peoples across the globe. Which lead us to the last but not least reason why we're hosting tonight's discussion on adaptation in Boston. And that is one of scale. Our university, Boston's only public research university, is a microcosm of our city. 40% of our students live in metropolitan Boston. Students from more than 138 countries attend UMass Boston. Over half of our students speak a language other than English at home. Almost half are the children of immigrants. We are the third most diverse campus in the United States, by far the most diverse campus in New England. We are educating the future citizens of our changing demography. We are reflecting the future demographic composition of our state and our nation. Demographically speaking, we in Boston are coming to a neighborhood near you. 10 years living in LA got me. Boston, too, is a microcosm of the major metropolitan cities in the industrialized world. How we model, predict climate change, how we engage and educate our citizenry on this existential matter, how we build and sustain synergetic, equitable partnerships, and how we develop nature-based solutions will shape, in no small ways, the future of our beloved coastal city, the future of our Commonwealth. We are informing global strategies in the spirit of advancing an ethic of care and what the great Max Weber called an ethic of responsibility in how we treat each other and how we treat our planet. I'd be remiss if I did not point out that the 4 university experts from whom we'll hear tonight represent a fraction, a very important fraction, of our UMass Boston scholars, colleagues, who bring their talents for basic research, for teaching, for community engagement to bear on the wicked problem of climate change, locally and globally. Climate change is a global problem. Tonight's conversation is a case study in which we will look at challenges and solutions and hear from 2 of Boston's most generous, considerate funders who are empowering progress. Kathy Stone of the Stone Foundation, the benefactor of our Stone Living Lab, will open the program momentarily. Jim Canales, president of the Barr Foundation, will lend closing remarks following a robust discussion hosted by Steve Thurwood, host of NPR's Living on Earth program. I sincerely appreciate all 3 of you for joining us this evening and for the passion, the clarity, the urgency you bring to our common purpose. Without further ado, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce a wonderful new friend, Kathy Stone. Kathy's president of the James M. and Kathleen D. Stone Foundation and has been deeply involved with environmental issues throughout the professional life. My dear Kathy,
thank you, Chen.
the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chancellor, for those very thoughtful remarks. And thank you all for being here tonight, whether virtually or in person. I can say for myself, it's my first virtual event in about 2 years. So it is memorable for many reasons, including that. It's very good to be here with old friends. Steve Thurwood, the founder of Living on Earth and its host, an old friend of Jim's and mine, and my new colleagues from the Stone Living Lab, Paul Kirshen, Bob Chen, and Rebecca Hurst, all involved in some way, and my very new friend, the Chancellor, who I have had the pleasure of meeting professionally but also socially, along with his brilliant wife. And so I think Boston has benefited enormously by your presence, and I am very proud to know you. And it's also wonderful to be here with Jim Canales, who, along with the Barr Foundation, has done so much for the city in just so many, many ways. My husband Jim and I are proud to support the Living Lab at UMass Boston, a partnership that unites government, nonprofits, academics, and the private sector in a common cause. As we know so well, and the Chancellor laid out, the challenges that confront us today are enormous. They're environmental, but they're social, they're political, and they will affect us all in myriad ways for many, many days. And of course, they will deeply affect our children and our grandchildren. The most recent news on climate change is grim. According to the most recent UN climate report, the seas are rising, the storms are more intense and much bigger than we previously thought, and they're all happening sooner. These challenges will affect Boston uniquely, but in a very, very consequential way. Just last week, many of you probably saw the arresting images of what various Boston landmarks will look like based on different climate scenarios. At times, the challenges we face can seem insurmountable. And yet, as I often remind myself, there is real reason for optimism, because we can do things today that can and will make a difference for generations to come. Here in Boston, we have the opportunity to harness the power of innovation, to devise new ways to control emissions, new ways to protect our precious resources, and new ways to make our human and built environment more resilient. This anniversary year, we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Boston Harbor Islands National and State Park. As we do so, I'm reminded of how far we have come as a community for those 25 years. We have a terrific park, a short ferry trip from downtown Boston. We have a clean harbor where people of all ages can swim, boat, and fish, and we have city and state government that deeply committed to environmental protection and coastal resiliency. We have the whole mix here, just as we have the whole problem here. And yet there's so much to do. I've always believed that when it comes to environmental protection, sustainability, and justice, one must work at multiple levels: the international level, the national level, and the local level. If we don't work at all three levels simultaneously, we will not achieve the durable change that we want and that we need. Indeed, this is the reason Jim and I chose UMass Boston as the academic center for the Living Lab. As many of you know, UMB is a very special place. It is deeply connected to Boston, and as the statistics the Chancellor reported, it is Boston. And it's also deeply connected to the natural world, to the flora, fauna, and diverse ecosystems that we all must coexist in. The lab's credo is resilience through research, and tonight that's why we are here. We're here to learn about the important research taking place at UMass Boston and the important role it can play in helping the city. But before we move on to the main event, I was asked to share a bit of my own history with the Boston Harbor Islands and how those experiences laid the foundation for the lab. And to do that, I have to take you back a ways to the early 1990s, when I was serving as the first chief of environment for the city of Boston under Mayor Menino. A proposal came across my desk to include the islands as a national park based on its unique geology, because it's the only location where islands are located in conjunction with the sea, the islands being composed of drumlins, meaning the residue of 15,000 years ago departing glaciers in conjunction with the ocean. I brought the proposal to Menino, who had, however, a choice to make, whether to support the creation of a new park or respond to a competing offer from the gambling industry, for which they offered to contribute more than $1 million to park a sea-based casino, but tied to the land, where you could arrive through and get to it without it roaming around. And Menino turned around. I don't know if any of you remember the mayor. He looked at me and he said, "Kath, I don't need Disneyland. I got in the harbor. I got the real thing." And so we set about negotiating the terms of the agreement, which he wanted to do, and we expected to take many, many years before Congress would approve the park, which is typical, and I had gone through the same process with the C&O Canal National Historic Park in Washington, D.C., and it took decades to get the park. So I didn't think anything of it and set about to work. Well, one day I got a call from Senator Kennedy's office, and he said, "The senator personally wants to tell you that there is a new parks bill, and you're not in it." Not because he doesn't care about the islands. He cared about them deeply. He visited them often, never with reporters, and often with his family. He'd come out with 40 Kennedy-related people and have a barbecue on the islands. So he really loved them. But he said, you know, other parks are ahead of you, and you're just not in, and we'd had hearings in the Senate, but not in the House. So that was fine. That was a Monday. The next day, I got a call from Kennedy's office, seemingly the same person, but I thought it had to be someone different. He told me the same thing. Not in the bill. Kennedy was sorry. We said, fine, we understand. We haven't had hearings in the House. Third day, I get a third call. Can't possibly be an error. Something's wrong when they keep telling me we're not in the omnibus bill. So I went down to the mayor, we checked over the text, and Friday we were in the bill. Senator Kennedy, Congressman Moakley, and Senator Hatch evaded, well, I wouldn't want to say that, but worked the rules in such a way that the Boston Harbor Islands National Historic Park was created. So what did that teach me? It taught me the way this happened and how it all worked is that we need to work on a problem at the city, state, and federal level. Because the park that emerged from this compromise is unlike any park in the country. It's a national park, it's a state park. It's managed by a 13-member partnership representing state, federal, municipal, and nonprofit communities. And for the past 25 years, the partnership has only grown stronger. A few years back, when we started realizing that climate change was upon us, and not just in the future, I knew once again we'd have to come together as a community. We'd have to have a robust partnership to address sea rise, intensifying storms, increased flooding, erosion of habitat, disappearance of green space, and of course, the way these issues disproportionately affect the underserved groups. To confront these challenges over the short and long term, we needed cooperation among scientists of many disciplines, as well as the deep involvement of neighborhoods and community-based organizations. We also need to educate and train generations of scientists, scholars, and leaders of all kinds and from diverse backgrounds. It's worth highlighting here among you alum that two UMass Boston alum are currently leaders at the federal and state level. Secretary Theo Heredis is the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and Gina McCarthy is President Biden's climate change czar. UMass Boston understands what it's going to take to make progress on the immensely complex climate issues facing Boston and the world. You're all going to play a role in this, and I'm delighted to be here this evening with all of you to hear how we can help. But now it's my pleasure to return the mic to our esteemed Chancellor, and he can introduce our panel, which will tie in how the islands are now important to solving the climate change problem. Thank you.
Don't go away. Don't go away yet. Brilliant. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for thank you for sharing the journey that is in many ways a journey into the future of a more humane, a more sustainable, a more equitable Boston. As a small token of our gratitude for your leadership and generosity, I'd like to welcome you, Jim, and the foundation to our funders' circle of generous philanthropists who provide transformational investment in our campus.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I like to now introduce Steve Thurwood, who will moderate tonight's discussion, incorporating the questions you've submitted in advance of our program this evening. Steve is executive producer and host of Living on Earth, which he created in the spring of 1990. The show has run continuously since April 1991 and is aired on more than 300 NPR affiliates in the United States. His 30-year career in journalism includes important roles at NPR, CBS News, the Boston Globe, WBUR, FM Boston, and WGBH TV Boston. He shared the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service as part of the Boston Globe's education team. He is president of the World Media Foundation and a lecturer in environmental science and public policy at Harvard University and an adjunct professor in our School for the Environment at UMass Boston. Joining Steve tonight from UMass Boston are Ellen Douglas, professor and associate dean of the School for the Environment, Bob Chen, professor and dean of the School for the Environment, Rebecca Hearst, director of the Sustainable Solutions Lab, and Paul Kirshen, professor in the School for the Environment and director of the Stone Living Lab. I invite you to come to
Well done. Thank you, Chancellor. I just want to say as we're getting started here that when I was in kindergarten at the David A. Ellis School in Roxbury, one of the first things that I heard about the Boston Harbor Islands was that there was some sort of an institution on Long Island that people would not want to go to, and that the harbor was not seen as something that people would pay a whole lot of attention to. And it was not particularly pleasant to visit. Or later on, as a person of color, the beach in South Boston was not a safe place to visit. I just want to say that what the University of Massachusetts Boston has done now is amazing. because the Chancellor talked about how I started living on Earth some 30 years ago. But this past term, I was teaching a podcasting class to environmental studies students, my flavor of environmental journalism, and their engagement taught me so much. In fact, I learned about the project that Professor Paul Kirshen was doing in East Boston from my students because they were so engaged on this. So I know that our gathering tonight probably be a little more crowded because there's, let's see, a playoff game with the Sox, and maybe the Bruins are playing across the way, and I think the New England Revolution, Bob Chen tells me that they're leading the league, and have the Celtics, where are they on tonight? So that means you folks are the dedicated ones that understand we are in a climate emergency. And one of the things I learned in kindergarten was that Boston was very old as a city. In fact, in 2030, this town will be 400 years old. It's our job as stewards of Boston to see that we get another 400 years at least. But if we don't do something about what's going on with climate disruption out there, Boston will be a place for boating. So I'm so happy that this team is going to make the presentations tonight, because in this iterative process, as we talk to each other and we begin to understand what can and should be done and how to get it done, we will make sure that there will be a Boston that can endure and give us at least another 400 years in some wonderful form or not. So our panel, each of our learned experts here is going to give you a brief presentation, and then we are going to have a chat, and we will respond to some of the questions that you have sent in and some of the questions that arrive. So without further conversation, let me bring aboard Professor Ellen Douglas.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Let me make sure I know how to use the pointer. Nope. All right. There we go. Okay. So, is it hot in here or is it me? We've heard a lot about record events. If you listen to the weather, you listen to the news, you read the paper, you hear a lot about record-breaking events. And normally, theoretically anyway, records will always be broken. You know, speeds will always be faster at the Olympics. People will always jump higher. Temperatures will always be exceeded. But normally, that will happen, the time between those record-breaking events will increase, and the amount by which records are broken gets smaller and smaller. It's harder and harder to break those records. But climate change is actually causing just the opposite. So over the last 5 years, I've just sort of been keeping track of some of this stuff. July of 2016 was the warmest month on record ever. And then the year of 2016 became the warmest year on record by over 1 degree centigrade, which is almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit, which is an enormous amount to break a record by. 2014 through 2018 were the warmest years on record at that point, in 139 years. And then in July of 2019, it became the warmest July in Boston by about 5 degrees. Again, a huge amount for a record to be broken. June of 2021, this year, was the hottest June in the US. And then July of 2021, just 5 years after July of 2016, became the hottest month on record ever. And why is this happening? Well, this is happening because we have this, in large part because we have this large global carbon cycle where there's carbon in the atmosphere, there's carbon in the ground, there's carbon in the water, there's carbon in the ocean. It's all in balance, and what we're doing is we're pulling fossil fuels, carbon that's buried deep in the ground that's separated from this cycle. We're pulling it out of the ground and adding it to this cycle, adding it to the atmosphere when we combust fossil fuels like gas and coal and oil. And so we're causing an increase, an imbalance in this carbon cycle. So what we know to be true, you've heard a lot of the statistics, and I won't lie, they're pretty depressing. What we know is true is that the climate is changing and that human activities are the cause. The scientific consensus on this is clear. There's no debate on that. But the question is, so now what? Well, we're here to tell you tonight that UMass Boston is doing a lot to answer that question. So the reason I'm talking here, and my colleague Paul Kirshen, is we've been doing a lot in Boston over the last couple of decades to figure out what sea level rise means for the city of Boston. And this map was published, was developed in partnership with what was then the Boston Harbor Association, which is now Boston Harbor Now. And we created these maps to show flood depths based on sea level rise at different, or based on high tide plus different levels of sea level rise. And I wanted to show you this stick. So we made these maps, and maps are kind of, some of us love maps and some of us don't really understand a map, but then, so I made this stick that was color coded to the map. So when you see yellow, it's 0 to 2 feet, so it's about this deep. Where you see this orangey color, it's 2 to 4 feet. Where you see, or that's pink, where you see the orangey color, it's 4 to 6 feet. And where you see blue, it's over my head, over 6 feet. And so it really gives you an idea when you look at that map and then you look at the stick, you see, wow, there's going to be a lot of flooding in a lot of areas in Boston. Well, so we put that map out in 2013, and over time we've been able to partner with other organizations, such as with Mass DOT, who actually helped us build a big fancy model to simulate storms, hurricanes, and nor'easters come in that actually cause the flooding, and we're actually able to not just look at the extent of flooding, but how the probability, the risk of that flooding occurring, and how that changes over time. So we've done a lot of good work here at UMass Boston to really help Boston and New England and coastal communities around the world to understand what climate change means for them and what we can do to mitigate and adapt to that. But one of the biggest things we have to do is talk about it. So I'm going to introduce Bob Chen, the Dean of the School for the Environment, and he's going to talk about how to talk about it.
Thank you, Ellen. She speaks softly, but she carries, And no offense, I'm a scientist too, but scientists speak in maps and graphs and models, and sometimes that doesn't get to everybody that needs to be hearing about sort of the messages. And so I learned from an actor that stories work quite well. And but, therefore. Humans have altered the global carbon cycle, and the climate system is changing. We know this. But science is not effectively being used by society to solve the problem, and quick enough to really have an effect. Therefore, we need to explore new ways to communicate the science. The science is correct, but we have to have more impact by communicating the science clearly to everybody that needs to be involved in the solutions and the adaptations. So Ed Maybach at the George Mason University Climate Change Communications Center says, simple messages repeated often by trusted messengers is effective. Let me repeat. Simple messages repeated often by trusted messengers is effective. So we have been innovating a number of different communication strategies at UMass Boston. We have tried to use Ozzy the ostrich as our spokesbird. Is he a trusted messenger? Well, we had a campaign over 15 months and posters that have, there's a few here that you see here that were on every red and orange line on the T and in every train station along those routes. And we used humor. And Ozzy the ostrich, the recognizable guy with the glasses there, Superstorm Sandy was just a fluke. Mommy blub, 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 I'm glad I have a long neck. And what we found was that the ostrich was highly recognizable, much more recognizable than all the other ads that were on the T. And everyone at the time, 2014 to 2015, recognized Ozzy the ostrich talking about climate change. And over the 15-month campaign, we talked about the reality of climate change, the relevance to Boston of climate change, and we left with a message of hope These are the things that Boston is doing to lead the world in adaptation, and it's not a hopeless message that we can address these things. So is Ozzy a trusted messenger? We took Ozzy and used the ostrich silhouette on just like that one over there. This is one of the 8 that were posted around Boston in areas that were accurately placed with Ellen's and Paul's map about what the actual flood depths were now, and it's right around the ankle. This is the one that was sitting at Faneuil Hall. The 100-year flood level is at his ankle. The 2050 level is around his knees, and way up in the chest there is the 2100 flood level at Faneuil Hall. So again, just like Ellen's stick, this is really high in places that you see. Here we have one at the Aquarium T stop, we had one at the UMass JFK stop, and this one at Faneuil Hall and some other locations around. And the map is scientifically accurate. Simple messages. We can change. That's a hopeful, simple message that's told by a child through art. And so here is a hopeful message. And the trusted messenger are our kids, the next generation that will be living with this. And it turns out that this lesson was learned when my daughter was a middle schooler. And she said, "Dad, did you know how much gas mileage is wasted by the tires that are underinflated?" I said, "I have no idea." She goes, "It's the," and I go, my initial scientific hat said, "Well, that doesn't amount to anything." And then my father hat said, "Well, it's much easier than arguing with a child to pump up my tires." And it is true in the literature that children are effective environmental advocates, and adults learn from children about environmental issues very commonly. So we use children in an art contest to make, you can see some of the artwork that is displayed around by the windows here, messages about climate change, some messages in Massachusetts. We're also doing this in Kansas. The winning artwork is put on the rapid transitory public buses. So the kids are taking their science and their learning and their messages and communicating it to the adult public everywhere in their own community. In addition, we are working with the Mass College of Art and Design to think about, I know the scientific approach is one way to approach the problem, but an artistic way is approaching another, a design way is approaching another, and if we blend these disciplinary approaches, we can get better solutions, more robust solutions to these really, really wicked, complex problems that the Chancellor was talking about. And so we see the development of the art and the science through these accordion books that record the thinking of the children as they progress and form their artwork. And we think about design, and we're blending the art and science to come up with better ideas and better visions about what we want our future to look like. So it will take all of us in many different spaces with a diverse set of strategies, and we have all sort of said the same message. It will take all of us. How do we communicate not just the science and the engineering, but all of our different disciplines to solve this problem? So with that, I'll introduce Rebecca Hurst, who will be talking more about some of the solutions.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Rebecca Hurst. I'm the director of the Sustainable Solutions Lab at UMass Boston. Let's see if I can get this going, too. Yes. And before I get started, would just like to thank Jim and the Barr Foundation so much for all of your support and partnership over the last, many years. It's really a pleasure to work with you and your team. So the Sustainable Solutions Lab at UMB, or SSL, as we like to call it, SSL, SSL, is a collaborative research and action institute focused on keeping historically excluded people and their homes and their communities safe and healthy as our climate changes. We know Boston has a deep, painful history of racism, systemic racism, and we also know, as we've seen, that Boston is extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And when we put those two things together, we have some people who are impacted by climate change much differently than others. We can see that yesterday's policies have a big say in what impacts we're feeling today. So here you can see a map, a historical map of redlining in Boston, and you can also see the heat island map from the Climate Ready Boston project that the City of Boston did based on research from UMass Boston. And you can see that places that were systemically not invested in currently have less tree cover, and people who live there are more at risk of heat stroke and asthma and other things that come about when you have less tree cover. And this is happening everywhere, right? In so many different places. We're seeing these headlines all the time, and it's, overwhelming to think about climate change and think about systemic racism and then how they interact. But the Sustainable Solutions Lab is facing those challenges head on. So as I said, we're a research institute. We're a partnership of 4 institutes and 5 colleges at the university. So that's the Collaborative of Asian American, Native American, Latino, and African American institutes on campus. Also the College of Liberal Arts, the College of Management, the College of Nursing and Health Sciences, the John W. McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies, and the School for the Environment with my fine colleagues here. So we focus on research, and hopefully we'll have enough time for me to share a little bit of that during our conversation. We're developing a community of practice with faculty all across the university in a wide variety of disciplines and interests. We're building a pipeline of graduate students to be the next generation of scholars. And we also host events, both on campus and off, influencing the broader climate adaptation community. So I look forward to sharing more, and in the meantime, here's some contact information. And I'll hand it over to Paul.
This works here. Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for coming out tonight. So, Ellen has talked about some of the climate changes we're going to see around here. Bob has talked about how they be communicated. Rebecca has spoken about some of the impacts to our marginalized and oppressed populations. What I want to talk about is some management strategies, how we can adapt to these changes. Because the Chancellor noted, all human and natural systems are sensitive to climate, and as the climate changes, we have to adjust to these changes. This is a process called adaptation. Before I talk about adaptation, however, I do want to say that the most important action we can take to respond to climate change is to cut down and control our emissions of greenhouse gases, which is causing the climate changes. Because if we can control our greenhouse gases and get them to like net zero by 2050, we may only have 3 feet of sea level rise in Boston instead of 7. We may only have 30 days a year over 90 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 90 degrees Fahrenheit over the summer. So it's very important we control our emissions. However, because of the inertia of the climate system, even if we stopped all our emissions today, we're still going to have changing climate for centuries. So it's really important that we think about adapting our built, natural, and human systems to the changed climate. And what I want to talk about in particular is some research we're doing at UMass Boston on what we call nature-based systems for managing present and increased coastal flooding in Boston. And so what's a nature-based system? Well, it's not this. This is a traditional monolithic concrete wall, which traditionally has been used for managing flooding. And this system actually causes environmental damage and is not tremendously stable or sustainable system for managing floods. A nature-based system looks more like this. There's actually a drawing of what's proposed for Fort Point Channel in Boston. As many of you may know, Fort Point Channel is an ugly stone-lined channel. But in this picture here, you see it full of vegetation. You see a wonderful raised landscape. The raising, the elevation of a landscape prevents the flooding. However, you notice on the water side, there's habitat. So it's ecological co-benefits of this system. Then, of course, you notice on the surface of this landscape, you see people, you see parks, you see trees, you see open space. So this kind of a system, this nature-based system, the system which mimics some aspects of nature, provides all these social co-benefits. And this is very important in neighborhoods like East Boston, where there's not a lot of green space, not a lot of trees. So if you build a system like this in a place like East Boston, yes, you prevent flooding, but also you provide a lot of co-benefits, social and ecological co-benefits in a neighborhood that has traditionally seen a lot of environmental injustice. And the city of Boston has embraced this idea of using nature-based systems to protect the coast from present increased coastal flooding. So here you see a drawing from Climate Ready Boston of this belt of green infrastructure along the coastline to protect the city from coastal flooding and also provide these social and ecological co-benefits. And I might point out that the city made this decision also based upon some research done at UMass on how it should protect itself from present and increased coastal flooding. And this shows actually a nature-based system which was designed by the residents of East Boston in conjunction with myself, a coastal engineer, and a landscape architect. And what you see here is, you see the raised landscape, which is parks, playgrounds, and things like that. But then you see behind it, actually integral to the flood management system, you see affordable housing. Because one of the challenges of making an area green and resilient is you bring in a lot of people and rents go up, and you can actually drive out the people you're trying to protect. But with this solution of also building affordable housing along with green resilience, you manage to keep in the neighborhood the people you're trying to protect. So now more and more there's interest in saying, yes, let's provide resilience, but also let's provide means to maintain the neighborhoods. Now, the problem with these green infrastructure systems, these nature-based solutions, is there are gaps in our knowledge of the performance of these systems. We don't know exactly how these systems are going to behave in storms. We don't know the best kind of vegetation. And a natural system can adapt and adjust to changes. Well, can we build systems that do this? So there are some research questions about nature-based systems. Also, there are questions about, do people actually use these systems? Do the social economic benefits I talk about, do they actually develop? So there's a lot of issues about the performance of these systems. And under the tremendous support of the foundation of Jim and Kathy Stone, we've got the Stone Living Lab at Boston, UMass Boston, to look at these kinds of challenges. And the lab is located in the Boston Harbor Islands, as Kathy noted. And it's actually a partnership with UMass Boston, Boston Harbor Now, an NGO, the City of Boston, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And of course, it's all funded by the Stone Foundation. And we're doing right now there's three kinds of research. One is in-place research. So we're actually planning to build on islands in Boston Harbor full-scale nature-based systems to test out their performance in a heavily monitored environment. This is pretty unique in the entire world. So right now, we have about 5 projects under design. We're going to build on several sites in Boston Harbor Islands to test out their performance, their biophysical performance. Second of all, there are already some nature-based systems built in Boston. And so in a couple of these systems, we're starting to monitor their performance. Do they actually provide the flood protection? Do they actually provide the social economic benefits? Do they actually provide the ecological benefits? And lastly, we're doing desktop research. So we're looking at developing robust policies on developing nature-based systems. Nature-based solutions are new to this area. There's all sorts of regulatory issues involved with them, financing issues, and so on. So we're looking at those. Also, as I mentioned, we're already looking at the co-benefits, and also we're doing computer modeling. We're developing computer models of nature-based solutions, because in our testing on the islands, we can't possibly test the performance of a system under every single climate or every single weather condition. But if we can build a computer model of the way a nature-based system performs, we can predict its performance under different climates and also different locations. And finally, this is our website. And we're actually having our first annual conference on next Tuesday, October 26th. And if you go to the Stone Living Lab website, you can sign up and join our conference virtually. And so, again, I thank you for your attention. And there's a very critical time in our history, and I'm glad we're all paying attention to it. So thank you very much.
We are turning on our microphones. I believe it's Dr. Kirshen. So now we have a chance to have a bit of a discussion about this. And I just want to remind people the context of us dealing with this situation is a dynamic one. You know, the snapshot, what we're seeing in terms of conditions, the records that Ellen talked about, that's changing. Climate disruption continues apace. It's not as if it's fixed. Yeah, okay, well, all right. So I just was making the point that as we look at this research and look at the promises and the opportunities, that we remember that this situation by itself certainly is not getting better, in fact, is getting worse at a much faster rate. You know, Paul Kirshen, you were on the IPCC. And all those estimates that came out of IPCC have undershot the actual data of the rate of change. So I think there's a simple scientific factor known as we's in trouble. We's definitely in trouble, but we can find the solutions. So start with some questions for our panel here. One of the questions we got asked is, how do you see climate change in conjunction with the other future themes of these discussions? Racism, health, workforce development. Who'd like to go first? All right, Rebecca.
I will. Okay, can people hear me?
Yeah?
Great. So
Take off the mask for a
take
moment.
off the mask.
Don't get too
I'm
close.
just so used to wearing it now. I forget when it's on. Yeah, so that's exactly the question that the Sustainable Solutions Lab is trying to answer. And we have researchers who are looking at all of those different things. So we have a seed grant that just started that's looking at employment data and climate data and trying to understand sort of an overlay of what are the different ways that climate change has disrupted jobs and job security, and how is that playing out with different types of jobs and in different industries. We're also obviously thinking about health and health data, and we have another project that's looking at heat and early birth and birth outcomes, and how does that play out, particularly in environmental justice communities, to try and understand the role that pollution and heat island impacts play. So there's just so many different ways that climate change plays out in our day-to-day lives. And I think often, unfortunately, when people think about climate change, they think about it either as really far away, or they think about it as polar bears, not about people. And we're really thinking about people, and we're really thinking about what are the ways that this is showing up in people's lives right now, and how can we ensure that as we're preparing for climate change, we're recognizing the current impacts and taking responsibility for past injustices, but so that we can ensure that everybody can thrive in our changing climate.
So, Professor Kirshen, you talked about the iterative process in East Boston to develop nature-based solutions and to be sure that the gentrification wouldn't push people out of the neighborhood. The Chancellor talked about how the UMass Boston campus is so diverse. People from, what did you say, 134, 138 countries, speaking 40, 50 languages. It is a minority-serving institution. There are more people of some flavor of color or another than not. How can the UMass Boston campus, how can the diversity of the campus be used in this iterative process to find solutions right within this community? Who wants to go on that one?
Well, I'll just point out, as we all know, UMass Boston is a majority minority institution. In fact, many of my students are actually from East Boston, both graduate and undergraduate. And we've worked together on several projects in East Boston. For example, the School for the Environment. Our seniors do capstone projects. I think every capstone I've done has been located in East Boston. So the students are learning the practical skills of working on climate change issues, but also they're helping the community of East Boston adapt to climate change. I also want to point out that the work could not be done with the students. I mean, these students know East Boston, they know Spanish, they know their neighbors, and it's just really exciting working with them. And then, so it's just an incredible relationship to be able to bring these students back to their home neighborhoods and work with them on these kind of problems. And of course, as was pointed out, they are the future. I mean, we've got to get them educated. They've got to be able to understand how to respond to these challenges.
Bob?
What I say to my class, every class I ever teach, is that the knowledge of the students is much greater than the knowledge of the instructor will ever have. And if you have all the students coming from the same background, you have one approach at a problem. But when you have all the students coming from different backgrounds, you have a much more robust and variety of perspectives to be able to solve these complex problems. And especially in the class of 500 that I teach, there are a lot of perspectives and a lot of interesting discussions and solutions that will become real solutions coming out of very simple ideas, but addressing all of us working together, addressing the problem.
Yeah, there's actually,
You want this one? Try this one. It doesn't bite nearly as hard.
okay. There's science, there's scientific journals, and a lot of research has gone in to show that a diversity of research teams actually improves the productivity and the outcomes of the research. So just as Bob and others have said, that if you have people from just one perspective working together, they're only probably going to get that one perspective. But when you get together a melting pot of ideas and perspective, you'll end up with much more productive and much more innovative and creative solutions.
There was a part of that question that included health and workforce development. Any of you want to comment on those opportunities or challenges? I mean, there's this, what's it called, a pandemic or something? How might this be related to climate disruption? Bob, you're good for that.
Rebecca can take the COVID issues.
Okay.
I mentioned the birth outcomes project, but it's true that in thinking about one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about with Sizzle is how can we learn from the ways that COVID played out, and we saw in just such stark terms how clearly disasters ravaged communities of color, how clearly disasters do and how clearly COVID did and continues to. And so we talk about how there are some ways that the climate crisis is similar to the COVID crisis, that there are exponential curves, and we knew that we thought things were okay, and then it seemed like maybe they weren't so okay, but we weren't exactly sure what to do, and then started to act, but not quite fast enough, and weren't able to get ahead of the problem. And but pandemics eventually burn themselves out, and climate change is just continuing to accelerate. And so we really need to be thinking about how can we learn the lessons of the pandemic as we're trying to recover from the pandemic. How do we ensure that climate change is woven throughout our response, and really trying to think about the ways that pollution also amplified some of the challenges with COVID. So there's lots and lots of connections there.
Yes, Ellen.
If I could just say something.
Oops. It doesn't like you. I don't know.
It doesn't like me. As I watched, the pandemic unfold, and then the vaccination, the anti-vaxxers and the pandemic deniers and all that stuff, it made me, I've been talking about climate change and educating and giving presentations and dealing with, climate denial and things like that for a long time, and it made me realize that it's not just us, it's not just the scientists, it's not just the climate change that are dealing with people who are unwilling or unwilling to receive the message and take the action. So I don't know what that does for us, but it gives us a group of people to feel good with, I guess.
Yeah, I might point out that famously, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Chen.
I was going to talk about the workforce development aspects. There was just a study about climate scientists that published in the peer-reviewed literature, and 1% of the publications on climate science were from Africa, African authors, and they're 16% of the population. And so again, just like needing collaboration of multiple perspectives, we're not diversifying the workforce enough to address the problems in offshore wind, solar panel power, everything that we're doing. And we, as the Chancellor said, we have a microcosm of that diversity of student, that diversity of perspective at UMass Boston, and we're taking the lead at diversifying these workforces across Massachusetts and hopefully using that as an example across the United States.
That's so fascinating. I was going to add back on the COVID thing for a moment. In Montreal, Canada, on September 28th, a mob stormed the health department because there was a vaccine mandate and torched one of the homes of the health official. This was September 28th of 1885, and the smallpox vaccine.
Oh, wow.
And the rap was that those British, those limey colonialists, are trying to crush French society. So denial, whether around vaccines or the climate, ain't nothing terribly new to our society. And that allows me to raise the next question, and we'll come back to the happier side in just a minute. But and that is, what are the costs of inaction? We're in an emergency. If the house were burning down, that's an emergency. We know what the cost is there. What is the cost of inaction for us locally, nationally, globally to not deal with this problem? And I think we're here to talk about Boston especially, so who would like to go?
Okay, I'll just say, in terms of the economic cost, the dollar cost, I forget the exact billions of dollars of damage that Boston might face in the future because of climate. But I do know that like every dollar we invest in, let's say, nature-based solutions to protect against flooding, results in saving $10 or $4 to $10 worth of damages. So essentially every dollar we spend avoids damages of 4 to 10 times that amount. And so it's incredible benefit cost ratio. So it's really important we make these investments. And these benefit cost ratio of like 4 or 10 to 1 for our investments does not include costs to human lives. It's really only cost to buildings and contents. It doesn't include the cost to health. It doesn't include the cost of these what they call knock-on impacts. Like if you lose a power plant, you severely damage the region's economy. It doesn't include all these additional secondary impacts. So the cost of inaction, just in terms of infrastructure, are huge. And then of course the cost of interaction in terms of human health are tremendously severe. I mean, the health impacts from climate change around here are going to include more vector-borne diseases, more heat stress, more heart attacks, more drowning, unfortunately. Huge list. And so, what is the value of a human life? And again, if we make these investments in adapting to climate change and trying to control the emissions of greenhouse gases, there's a huge benefit cost ratio. As an old New England saying, if I can say it correctly, an ounce of prevention is worth.
Pound of cure.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And so
I think it says New England.
It's so true in dealing with adaptation. Either pay a little now or you pay a lot later.
Yes, Bob.
I'll give you another example of an angry mob was the ratepayers before Boston Harbor was cleaned up. They were burning their water bills and saying, this is a ridiculous amount to pay, $5 billion. Who can afford that? We're paying this. There's no way that's going to be worth it. And now you look at the Boston Harbor and the National and State Park, and there's not a single person that says, oh, that was a bargain. And it's the same thing with climate change, right? If we invest now, you might not imagine what it's going to give you in the future, but it's going to be well over what you spend.
I also want to point out that this opportunity, unfortunately, we have this opportunity that we have to take, which is adapting to climate change, but it is going to give us a chance to, let's say, rebuild Boston and make it a lot greener. And also, if we invest wisely, we have a chance to right some of these social injustices that have occurred in the past. So it's really given us a real opportunity to sort of right a lot of the wrongs of the past. So we should certainly take advantage of that in this preparing of Boston for a new climate.
So we have time for just one more round of questions here. And what's in front of me from the questions that were asked earlier, somebody here in the audience asked this, or maybe you're not even here and you're out there online. Anyway, thanks for this question. How can those of us here, and I think this person's referring to everybody in this room, how can we be part of the solution?
Well,
Should we go down the line?
Yeah,
okay.
We'll go down the line. Yeah, sounds
So,
good.
so a couple of things. Probably first is how you vote. So I think that's really important. Second of all, there are things we can do, like the choice of the car we drive, kind of house we have, how we heat and how we cool it. Also, how we educate our kids. I think those are a couple of really important things. And then, of course, supporting educational institutions like UMass Boston is a great investment.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I would agree on the voting and also on making sure that your elected officials know that you're voting for them because of their support for climate policy. And also talking about climate change all the time to everybody in lots of different ways, because we can't do anything about it if we're not talking about it. And there's just so many ways that it's woven through our lives that we don't always notice. But once you start to see it and talk about it, people are like, oh yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. And that starts turning the cogs and the gears.
There's a lot of people that say, what can one individual do when it's such a global problem? It's hopeless. And I say, lead by example. And the example I give my students when I talk about solid waste is when I go out and walk my dog, I take those gomper things and I pick up trash in the 2 square blocks around my house in 10 minutes. Now, my 2 blocks are pretty clean. But if I tell that to my students or I tell that to my neighbor and they see me doing that, then they do their 2 blocks. And they do their 2 blocks, and suddenly the whole town is clean, no litter. And then that town is an example, and the whole city becomes clean. And then it goes on. So the actions of an individual, by leading by example and showing what you can do, collectively will proliferate and have large-scale impacts.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a scientist to talk about climate change. And in fact, a book I'm reading encourages us all to figure out the kind of activities we really enjoy, that we can connect to other people with, and think about the impacts of climate change on that. Like, for example, I have animals and I have to buy hay, and it just costs me 50% more for hay this year because of weather. That makes a difference, and I have a lot of animal friends, so I can connect to them in that way when we talk about the cost of hay this year. So there's all kinds of ways we can talk about climate change and convince people by connecting with them over the things that matter to them.
So these are all terrific ideas. I'll just simply say it's really important to tell the stories, all of these stories, and share success, and keep, whether it's Bob picking up litter or, carpooling with people. If 5 people get together and carpool, that takes an awful lot of emissions. If they just do it 1 day a week, that's a 20% reduction in emissions, right? So these are things that we can do. The trick is to remember that we can. The trick is to remember that we're not victims in this. I have to admit that I came here using gasoline, probably supplied by the Exxon Corporation, because I don't have any other choice. I mean, I have a plug-in hybrid, so much of the way I came with electricity, but its backup is petrol. But I do have a choice. I move to a plug-in. I tell my friends about the plug-in. I say, if you live in a place that could get flooded out or a big storm, I can go 50 miles without needing to see a gas station. And if you've ever been stuck in New Orleans or Florida when one of these things go down. So how can we be part of the solution is actually all we have to do is believe we can be part of the solution. Because once we believe that we're part of the solution and begin to act, we are, and it'll work. So with that, I want to thank our astonishing panel here tonight, Paul Kirshen and Rebecca Hurst and Bob Chen and Ellen Douglas. Please give them your thanks. And now, Chancellor, you're on again.
There we go. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Steve, Alan. Thank you, Bob, Rebecca, and Paul for that wonderful, wonderful conversation. And I have so many thoughts, but I can't jump the line. But I have to say this. Truth seeking, truth finding, truth telling. We have a crisis in our world today. Let's go back to that great project of seeking, finding, and telling the truth. It is a great pleasure to introduce Jim Canales, President and Trustee of the Bar Foundation. Jim was appointed President and Trustee in May 2014. Prior to joining Bar, he spent 2 decades in a variety of roles at the James Irvine Foundation in California, a place I know well, including President and Chief Executive Officer from 2003 through 2014. Jim maintains a range of volunteer engagements. He serves as trustee of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, the Kaiser Family Foundation, and Easter Bank Charitable Foundation, among others. The Bar Foundation is one of the city's most generous philanthropic foundations, and our campus has benefited enormously from their support of many, many initiatives over the years. But perhaps no greater engagement than in the issues pertinent to climate change and clean energy. We're exceedingly grateful, Jim, for the Foundation's investment you have made on the programs at UMass Boston, including the Sustainable Solutions Lab. And here, after listening to our scholars and to Steve, I have to channel my inner Jean-Paul Sartre, who I think was paraphrasing Voltaire, when he said, if we didn't have the Sustainable Solutions Lab, we would have to invent it. Wonderful, wonderful. Jim, I welcome you to share how tonight's discussion reflects and amplifies the mission of the iconic Bar Foundation. Jim Canales.
Good evening, everybody. I had originally thought, what a terrible speaking slot, as everybody would have been eager to get back to the ball game. But don't look at the score if you haven't. I'll just leave it there. But I promise I won't go through the 9th inning in my brief remarks here today. It's a pleasure to be with all of you, and I was asked to close the program in part to tie together some of the themes that we've all heard over the last hour in this very rich discussion. And that's really what I want to do, and I will be brief. But before I do that, I just want to extend a very warm welcome to our new Chancellor. Chancellor Suarez Orozco arrived here in August of 2020 in the middle of a pandemic to take on the helm of one of the most important institutions in our community. As somebody who also made the trek from California to Massachusetts, I'm delighted to have him here. We hear a lot about sisters in service. I'll say as a brother in service to this broader community. And I just want to extend a warm welcome to you, and we are so fortunate to have you here, Chancellor. I think if there's something that is very evident from the conversation today, it is that UMass Boston sits in a central organizing role in this community on the critical challenges that face not only this community, but frankly, the world. And as we heard today, the role that the university plays to illuminate complex issues, to pilot solutions that are innovative and creative to some of the biggest challenges we face, and to convene leaders to really explore these problems deeply and also understand what solutions might be put in place is such a critical role. And we are so fortunate to have an institution of this caliber and quality in our backyard. There have been many very nice words said about the Barr Foundation tonight, but I'm always the first to say that the work that we do is an enormous privilege. And to be perfectly honest, we cannot do anything without the partners that we have the honor of supporting. So for all of the very nice words and accolades about the Barr Foundation, blah, 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 the reality is it's really UMass Boston that deserves our thanks and our gratitude and frankly, our thanks for all of the work that they have done, not just on these issues, but much broader than that. Our foundation commits approximately $35 million a year to climate change within our annual grant-making budget of about $120 million. We focus on clean energy, mobility, and issues of climate resilience. As you heard earlier from Rebecca, we've been a proud supporter of the work that she has led at the Sustainable Solutions Lab. We do this work because we are convinced that we need bold action to address the big challenges that face us today. And we also do this work because we are in this for the long haul as a perpetual institution that is committed to this region. So in that context, I wanted to call out three themes that I heard in the conversation tonight, and I'll just close with these. The first is that climate change can often feel like a very ethereal, sort of out there issue. And somebody on the panel really made this very important point, that we have to remember this is a human issue. People are at the center, and the people who are being most affected by everything that we have heard earlier today are often our most marginalized populations, not just locally, but around the world. And so for all of the data that we might hear and all of the research that we may read, the reality is we have to remember that this affects people. And I so appreciate UMass Boston lifting that up. The second is the importance of equity and justice in this work. We often don't associate climate change with equity and justice on first blush, but fortunately we are coming to understand that environmental justice is a real need and a pressing and urgent challenge for all of us to address. And I also appreciate how UMass Boston is thinking of these issues through an equity and justice lens, not just kind of from the remove academic research perspective, but really thinking about people and equity. And finally, and it was said, I think, clearly throughout all of the comments tonight, this is an urgent issue that requires all of us to be engaged today. And that point was made multiple times. There's no need for me to repeat it. I want to repeat, however, what the Chancellor said at the outset as a bookend to his remarks, which is inaction is not a choice. And I hope if we come away with one theme today, it is that all of us have a role to play. For us at the Barr Foundation, we are so honored to be in partnership with UMass Boston and many others who work on this critical issue in this region, including many of you in this room. We are grateful for the work that you do, the leadership that you provide, and the impact that you have. Thank you for allowing me to be with you this evening.
Jim Moore, blah, blah, blah. Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your pithy synthesis of the issues that surfaced in our conversation today. We're grateful, Jim, for the long history of support of the foundation and your personal generosity in sharing this evening with us and the partnership that you and your colleagues bring to every interaction. Please, Jim, accept this beautiful, beautiful bowl as a gift, as a token of our gratitude. It's a beautiful glass bowl crafted by artists in Martha's Vineyard Glassworks, a token of our thanks for the foundation's membership in our founders circle. Because no good deed goes unpunished, this is another present for you, and we'll talk about that when next time we meet.
Are you done with me?
Climate, I'm done with you. Dismissed. Climate adaptation, and this is the key word. 150 years ago, Darwin articulated a sentiment that really is not the strongest or the smartest or the fittest that survive. It is the most adaptable. And this is the challenge of our times. And climate adaptation, it will be hard work, it's considerate work, it's compassionate work, and it is, above all, community work. It's essential. It's essential. It is the challenge of our times. Thank you for being part of our community. And with that, beacons and friends, I close this evening's program. Now you can have your heart broken and look at the phone and find out where we are. Thank you so much. Good night. Muchas gracias.